Today's an exciting day. Why is that? Because by the end of this episode, we're gonna get this guy started, or at least try to. And another significant thing that I wanted to mention is that today is the 2-year anniversary of when we went out to Porter's and grabbed that camper special, hauled it back to the garage, and started the journey. Maybe it feels a little bit stretched out, I'm not sure, but we work on it when we can. We do have other jobs that we have to do. We've got to run a store, we've got families and all that sort of stuff, but we are definitely nearing the really kind of, not the end, but we're 2/3 of the way through at this point. And we're so happy that anybody who has been watching, and I hope that more and more people are starting to catch on. There's all sorts of little spots on the engine here that need a plug-in to avoid any vacuum issues. Got to make sure that they look more like this and less like this. So jumped online, ordered a pack of just an assortment, I guess, just to say. Showed up the other day, so I'm gonna plug those up. I think I'm gonna have to track down this little block-off blocks here. Might have to go steal that from another engine. I'm not sure where that one went to. Plugs are done for the most part, so are these plugs. That was a bit of an adventure grabbing them off the other engine because it was kind of tucked away in the corner. So now what I'm going to work at is getting all of this nicely organized back here. Know that I've got a couple spots where I've got to run some stuff for starter related things where nothing is really in the way of the exhaust, and also get this guy organized so that I can hook up the fuel line. Got the fuel line hooked up right in here, connected up all nice. Now I'm just working at getting the power cable run here from the battery up to the starter. I want to make sure I don't get too close to my header so nothing melts, but I'm also working on grounding the engine to the frame. I got this strap. Looks like I can just bolt into this guy here and then run something over to the frame itself. So I'm gonna make myself a bolt. Got that guy right there. Doesn't quite fit, a little too long. Gonna grind it down. The ground is hooked up there, got my battery cable run along with it, got everything tied in nicely down there, and then what I've done is I've bolted my ground in on this side, making sure that nothing here rubs. So I'm back today to continue on our wiring journey. My goal is to get these guys hooked up. Now, to be able to do that, I also have to get this guy hooked up from the alternator to the starter and get this fuse block hooked up. Gotta say, it's the first time I've ever done anything like this. It looks pretty straightforward, but I will admit I'm a little bit apprehensive because I don't completely understand it. So I'm going to make sure to read the instructions in the effort to avoid any potential electrical mishaps. And we're all hooked up. Wire off the alternator, traveling down over here, joined up by neutral safety switch wire, and also we've got the wire that's coming out from the main power. Comes into this fuse block here, and then travels down, and then we've got everything hooked up. It's really hard to see, but it's connected down there to the starter. So all that remains really is figuring out how the exciter wire attaches to the alternator. I've got my instructions going on over here. I've read them over a couple times. The only thing that's a little bit odd is that they're calling for a 4-pin connector. I only have a 2. So I'm gonna have to just do a little bit of research. There's a resistor and all this other sort of stuff that has to go in there. It needs to be connected up so we make sure that the alternator does not burn out. So I walked away from everything and got to thinking about something that was really bugging me, and that was the cabling for the ignition. So the battery, the fuse block, and all that stuff that hooks into the starter. To me, I don't think it's a huge deal. Well, I do think it's a huge deal, but I've been told it's not a huge deal. That is as close as it is to the header. It's impossible to see in here just because of the way everything's set up, but I think it's too close. So what I ended up doing was probably some overkill. Ordered myself up some reflective insulating tape. So that's saying up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit direct, 2000 degrees radiant heat. So that is going to be a big help. And then I also got this sleeve of heat shield for spark plug wires, and then what I will do is I'll put the tape on first, then I will put the sleeve over top, and I don't imagine we will have any problems at all. You can see we've got our tape there first, plus we've got our extra layer here of shield because it is close, not touching, which is good, so everything should be fine. Onto some temperature sensor install, but first I'm going to install the throttle cable bracket on the back or behind the throttle body. Now my kit is over here by my keys. There were a whole bunch of these that I found online, all I think pretty much from the same manufacturer, but also varying different comments as far as quality goes. One of the biggest complaints was that this bolt here is too small to fit in here and keep some bracketry from moving, and they are right. So what that basically means is that I'm going to probably have to find another bolt. All hooked up. Brackets in, went on no problem whatsoever. This bolt, which is not the original one, I don't know if that'll be a permanent one or not, but what I'll do is I'll just use that for now so that we can hook the line up and give everything a test. I knew that this was the plug that we needed to connect into the alternator, but the wire gauge was very, very small in comparison to the one that was coming off of the fuse block. So I did some running around town. I found this guy here, much thicker gauge, and it should be no problem at all to hook it up. Then we've got the alternator connected, just looking at my instructions here, and then going over and connecting up to these wires here. All hooked up. I'm just running a bit of covering over this so wires don't rub, and also so it looks a little bit nicer. This wire, the kit says you can hook it up or you don't have to hook it up. It's just a delete. You know what? I'll probably just hook it up anyway. It connects to the single post here. Next up is the temperature sensor. Now, the Terminator requires information from a temperature sensor to run itself, obviously. So I've got it hooked in to this guy right here at the front of the engine, but I also want to be able to run an actual temperature gauge. So what I've got to do is pull this plug out. I wasn't aware of this before. It's probably common knowledge to a lot of people, but there is provisions on either side to be able to put temperature sensors in. So what I ended up doing was I've got this guy here, pretty typical. Obviously way too small to fit in that hole, so I went and got an adapter. Now here's the interesting thing about this adapter. Jumped online to just grab something that was relatively inexpensive, but the one thing that was super interesting in terms of reviews, because I read them all the time, is that all the other ones were made of aluminum, and when the buyers were putting them in, a lot of the times they cracked. So I decided to splurge, spend the 27 bucks and get the actual brass fitting that I know will not give me any issues whatsoever. Adapter is in. So the one thing that I did run into is the fact that the depth of this temperature sensor and the diameter of the end is a little bit long and wide. So what I ended up doing was I just drilled out the base of that brass fitting a bit. It wasn't by a lot, so now I'm just going to thread this guy, and I already checked, it fits no problem at all, and then I can hook it up, and we've got one more thing done. Pretty simple, straightforward setup. I'll be able to read what the engine temp is in the car while the Terminator reads it as well. Next challenge. Throttle cable. I did a lot of research on this the other day trying to figure out what the best setup was to run off of our adapter that we had installed a little while ago. This is just on kind of loose because we got to figure that out once we get some adjustments made to get the cable hooked up. But the one thing that is odd that I found is you've got this end, which is intended to connect to something that is in a 90-degree to this. But after doing some talking with Tim, something that I didn't think about, and I don't know if this is something that everybody else would get and I just completely missed, or it's something you don't always think about, is that this cable will pull right out. That means that there's a little ball in here. This is just called a NARP, and it unscrews and pulls right off. Pull the cable out, and then what I did was I saved this plastic piece here, the OEM part of the square body gas pedal. That guy just fits right in there. Here's a challenge. I'm hooking up the throttle cable for the LS, and I'm running into an issue where the part that goes through the firewall, which we can see right in here, little ferrule or whatever it's called, is too straight. As you can see, when this goes back, it's on a bit of an angle. So when you push on the pedal, it pulls it up and it's binding against the opening in that one threaded section. So now what I'm going to try to do is I want to try to get it on an angle. Now where we live, it's hard to find specialty parts, which basically means you have to make your own. So what I'm going to try, and I'm going to see if I can succeed, is I'm going to take some skateboard bushings. I'm not sure if people know what trucks are, but trucks are the axles that attach to the bottom of your skateboard that you put the wheels on. And these are the bushings that allow them to pivot. So what I'm going to do here, because it's a very, very hard rubber, and I'm going to just grind that down on a bit of an angle, and then that might allow me to get the proper angle that I want on that cable. So here's my piece here, ground that down. Now it is stepped because there is a plate in the way exactly where the throttle cable needs to go. So then I've got a washer and my other piece. It's gonna go on just like that. Now I had it in already and I didn't have the washer on, and it was really, even though this is pretty hard rubber, this ferrule was still biting in and not giving me the angle that I wanted. So hopefully this will give it a harsher angle and then we should be all set. And there we go. Got it on. Moves okay. Mine's a little bit, might have to do some adjustments, but it is on way more of an angle than it was when I had it in the other way. So we started going through the motions to get the car to turn over. Ran into a couple of issues, actually 3 in total. So the first one was loose fittings. I thought I had tightened everything up enough, but clearly I had not. Lots of leaky gas and stuff like that here. So I removed everything, disassembled everything, reassembled everything, tightened it all back up, made sure that everything was fitting well. And I mean, it was leaking from everywhere. Next issue was neutral safety switch, something that I had thought might be a problem, but then I completely forgot about. 2 wires hang under the dash, just link those guys together there, and they are done. The starter will actually turn over now. Final problem. When we were turning the car over, everything was shutting off. Power was basically going off on anything Terminator related. One of the issues that I wasn't aware of, and I hope this helps some people if they aren't sure, there is a switched power that goes over to the relay that turns the Terminator on when the key is turned on in the car. The one thing that has to happen with that though is it has to be ignition on, so an accessory on, but it has to remain hot when the engine is cranking over. Did some research, made some phone calls. From my paintless wiring kit, I was told to just use the coil wire because it is something that's not going to be used in our setup and it's going to do exactly what we want it to. And I called Painless, they confirmed it, and I called Holly and they said that it was fine too. So now all it's a matter of doing is hooking that wire up and starting to crank it over again. Okay folks, 2 years of working on this thing comes down to this. Tim?
We're gonna give it a shot. We're gonna try to start it. We'll see what happens, what kind of kaboom there will be. There will be some kind of kaboom, either a good kaboom or a not good kaboom.
Not everything is completely hooked up, so we'll just run it for a second and see.
Okay.
All right.
Fuel pump pumping. Terminator terminating.
We realized that the cam sensor wasn't connected, which is why we're having an issue, so we're going to give it another try.
Okay, ready?
Yep. Why is there's a whole bunch, come here. attempt number 3. We ran into a couple problems. We didn't have our fuel pump hooked up to the right output, and there was something with our throttle position sensor that was kind of weird. So now, away we go.
We still may need that. Just
Okay.
got to feather this. It's a smidge to get her to do things.
All right.
Okay. Woo!
It stalled. But
Yeah, I let it.
did you?
She goes!
There you go. Now we just have to do some fine tuning. What's that?
That's what I was just gonna say. Now a little bit of fine tuning and we're good to go.
All right, folks, that was exciting. I'm so happy that we've reached this point. Thanks for watching. Tune in again to see where we go from here, and have a good one.